Fail fast and fail early. This is a mantra of many Silicon Valley startups. And mistakes and failing, they're all an inevitable part of this learning process, and we don't have to be afraid of it, but we don't have to go out of our way to seek failure out either. Because if you're pushing the envelope of what's possible for yourself on a regular basis, failure is going to find you. We don't need to fetishize failure or other mistakes. Track down progress in all aspects of your life, including fitness, and learn from the mistakes of others so that you don't have to make those same mistakes yourself. And that's my goal for today. I'll be going over the training failures of my past and the mistakes that I've made and lay them out for you so you don't have to make those same mistakes. And ultimately, that's going to accelerate the progress of your fitness journey. Hey, it's Ben Wise, and this is The Fitness Movement. The Fitness Movement is brought to you by Zor Fitness. Zor Fitness is my company and my platform to deliver incredible training-related content to people just like you. I don't just podcast. I write in-depth fitness articles. I break down common movements in the sport of fitness. I program workout plans, and I offer one-on-one coaching for competitive and recreational athletes. And the best part is most of what I have on zorfitness.com is totally free. Check out these resources by going to zorfitness.com. That's ZOAR fitness.com. Hope to see you there. And welcome back to my rant on common training pitfalls and the mistakes that I've made and ultimately how you're going to be able to avoid those same mistakes. So I'm not saying that you're going to go through these exact same things that I'm going through, but I try to pick mistakes from my past that I think are going to apply to a lot of different people and that I just see a lot of athletes make. And again, this could be a beginner or advanced athlete. It doesn't necessarily matter. I think these are pretty evenly distributed across populations. So I think this is going to be good for a lot of people, and that's why I picked these particular mistakes. So the outline of today, I'm going to go through 6 mistakes that I kind of picked out and teased out from my past training, things that I saw were issues, why they kind of happened to me, and then how I overcame it, and ultimately how you are going to be able to avoid that. So just kind of good training principles to abide by and things that you're going to want to stick to in your own training or avoid in your own training. So the 6 are going to be, number 1 is skipping steps. So in other words, not sticking with basics or just kind of layering too quickly. Number 2, central nervous system load was just too high. So I'll probably refer to that a lot as CNS, that's central nervous system. Number 3, unbalanced doses of weaknesses and strengths. 4, prioritizing novelty over consistency. 5, not having enough fun. And 6, doing it all on my own. Okay, so let's jump back to number 1, skipping steps or just layering too quickly. So really, I got away from the basics. I didn't stick with using set progressions. I didn't really follow good motor learning principles that I've talked about before all the time. I mean, sometimes I did, but not all the time. And I would tend to throw it into mixed modal work just way too quickly, just because that was kind of fun and entertaining, and that's really what I enjoy doing, and I still do to a large degree. And there's nothing wrong with that, but at the same time, I think that did potentially, and probably still does to a degree, blunt some of my adaptation and really some of my long-term progress because of that. So basically what happens is I'll get to a certain point where I'm able to do a lot of things, but because of certain positions are flawed or whatever's going on, I kind of have to take steps back in order to go forward again. So an example of this is in 2017, I was learning to do handstand walks, and I thought they might show up in the open, and funny enough, they actually did, which I don't necessarily recommend trying to game and guess as to what's going to come out, but I thought for some reason that we're going to get inverted more this year. Whatever the case was, I thought that handstand walking was coming out, so I started to practice handstand walking a lot, and I abided by all the good motor learning principles for that. Like I would practice probably 3+ days a week for 10 or 15 minutes in unfatigued settings and all of that, but my positions weren't very good, and I couldn't do like a static handstand, and I still can't, by the way. But I learned a handstand walk, and I progressed in that skill, that individual skill, pretty quickly, even though I couldn't do some of the basic things that you're recommended to do, like be able to hold a static handstand before you walk. I can walk pretty easily now, even when I'm tired in high volume settings, when my triceps are blown up, when my core is tired, whatever the case is. I'm actually pretty good at my hands because of that, but I still am going to be limited to a certain degree in my positions, and I have a hard time, especially when my midline is really fatigued, to be able to hold a good position. And that just goes back to the fact that I can't hold a static handstand and I don't have great positions there, so I'm limited by that position. So if I would have taken more time at the beginning and nailed down those positions before layering, that would have ultimately made that a quicker process for me down the road. Like I'd be further along now than if I wouldn't have skipped those steps early on. So I'm kind of having to backtrack now and go back and relearn things that I should have learned a while ago just because I didn't stick with the basics long enough and hold to certain progressions and those good general rule of thumb things. And this was also the case for me for muscle ups. So I could do 18 unbroken ring muscle ups before I did a single strict ring muscle up. And it wasn't just like I wasn't trying that hard to do the strict muscle up. Like I literally couldn't do the strict muscle up, and yet I could do that many kipping ring muscle ups. And it was really just kind of like a mobility, positional strength type thing. But I still, like, that was a big hole in the game. And once I filled that, my rep max for muscle ups jumped way up because I had the full range of motion, was able to control it way more fully now. And you could see I like hit a certain ceiling in my performance. I had to go back to the basics, and then I could progress again. If I would have layered a little bit slower where I was, okay, I need to do a strict muscle up before I can do kipping muscle ups, like that recommendation, or is, do it concurrently where I'm learning both at the same time, and they're kind of in an acceptable range. Whether you learn a kipping or strict first, even if we kind of sidestep that argument for now, let's just like, okay, it's clearly wrong to have 18 kipping and 0 strict. So that's clearly wrong. I should have addressed that earlier on, and then I would have not blunted my long-term performance because of that. So everyone falls into this in different ways. For me, it's just because like I love throwing things into mixed modal work and having fun with it and doing those kind of workouts. That's really fun to me. That's not necessarily fun for everyone. Some people like really enjoy just doing like unfatigued skill practice, and like that would be way more fun, and they don't put it into mixed modal work. So that's their flaw, or whatever the case is. But I think for a lot of people, basics just aren't fun. Progressions aren't super fun. Like it's not Instagrammable, it's not entertaining. And what I used to always say is like, it's not sports specific. That was like my way to like throw that under the umbrella of like, it's good training because it's sports specific, rather than saying like, I don't feel like doing a lot of things that are general and progressions and more basic. And that's really an error. And I mean, right around like probably again, the same time, probably 2017, 2018 is when I started to transition a lot of my warm-ups from more general warm-ups where I was doing like calisthenics and kind of, again, more generalized things that you wouldn't see programmed into CrossFit style workouts. And I transitioned that into movements that I'm going to see in CrossFit open workouts, just at lower levels of that. So it might be wall balls or thrusters, really lightweight. It could be easy rowing. It could be burpees. It could be anything that I could just kind of get moving and start going, but it'd be the same thing that you would see in any sort of Metcon scenario. So how can you avoid it? I would say number one, hire a coach. That's their job, is for them to help guide you and to make sure that you're sticking and being on track and not falling into some of these pitfalls that people do a lot. So if someone has an experienced coach, they're going to automatically kind of sidestep a lot of these bumps in the road. And that's a big part of what the coach does, is just kind of helps anchor that athlete to make sure that they are prioritizing their long-term development. The other thing that I think is really helpful, if you get someone who is what I would consider to be a disciplined training partner, but they're not just dedicated in the sense that they're showing up every day, but disciplined in the sense that they're going to be valuing their long-term development over their short-term reward of like, rather than, you know what, this looks fun today, let's do this workout. Rather, what do we need to do today to get to where we want to be over the course of the long term? And really what the coach and the training partner do for an athlete is creating a system to anchor you in your day-to-day training. It's no different than like the job of like a skeleton or a template for programming, in the sense that you go back to that thing, look at it so that you're not deviating from the course that you set out. Yes, you might have things change and shift and be dynamic on a day-to-day setting because that's what's needed for a sport. But at the same time, if you have a system, something that's going to anchor you in your day-to-day training, that way you don't get sidetracked or like shiny object syndrome. And that's really important for you to have that support anchoring system. And then the last thing is just reminding yourself of the importance of the basics, and then reminding yourself to layer slowly. And that's not necessarily groundbreaking, but it is super helpful. If you're just like, yes, I know that I'm going to get pulled away from this or want to get pulled away from this time to time, I'm just going to stay the course, stay anchored to what I know is important, and make sure that I am following the progressions that I know are going to get me to where I want to go. The second mistake that I made was that my CNS load was too high. So when CrossFit was new, everyone did CrossFit every day. Like everyone did like Metcons and things every day is what I mean by that. And then everyone got better for like a period of time. And then everyone got super like burnt out. So they moved to like this strength plus a WOD, like the strength conditioning sort of model. And then it moved to strength and accessory or a WOD, or it moved to strength and skill plus intervals plus accessory. And it kind of kept going and going, where people got wiser over time and they figured out what was needed for longevity, in regardless of whether it's a competitive version of the sport, just longevity, so that you can actually do this long term. And even now, CrossFit CrossFit and the sport of fitness isn't new by any means, but at the same time, I think people who are coming into it and who are relatively new, they can make the same mistakes a lot of times. And coming into CrossFit, my CNS load was just way too high. Like I was doing max attempts all the time. I was doing lots of volume in the main lifts. I was doing every workout as max effort, as hard as I could. And I think that's true for a lot of people who are starting out, is they get drawn in and sucked in, especially if it's a class atmosphere where everyone wants to race each other and go super hard all the time, and it's fun. But then eventually you get to the point where you just start to become overtrained, where you're like feeling foggy after workouts, like this lethargy, brain fog, just kind of like a zombie for like the 30 or 60 minutes after a super hard workout. Just throughout your day, honestly, your life, you're going to have high inflammation. You have a pretty low adrenal response to exercise in general. Like it's hard to get up for exercise anymore. You're overall slow to adapt. You're irritable. Just all ways to describe overtraining as a whole. And why did this happen? I mean, it was just too many max effort metcons. Like I said, like if you go all out all the time, your 100% starts becoming like a 90% and an 80%. Even though it feels like it's 100% effort, it's really 80% of your capacity. And then you start going downhill from there. So what feels truly max effort really isn't max effort anymore. And that's what I mean by kind of a CNS blunt, is that's what I'm saying, is just because you're going 100%, you're still not at a 100% output. And one of the things we have to realize is you only have so many all-out efforts in a week, where you might have one, maybe two chances to really go 100% all out. And if you do it more than that, you are not going to be 100% all out anymore. Like it might feel that way. Your perception of that might feel like it's 100%, but you're no longer at 100% output. So if we are doing multiple days all out, or you feel like you're doing that, you have to back off. That's one of the things that's definitely blunting your progress, especially if you're doing hard intervals or assault bike sprints or anything like that. You're really blunting your ability to adapt to any sort of strength or aerobic work. Like you're just going to be way slower to adapt to any of those stimuli than you would have been before. And I think that coupled, so the too many efforts in a week coupled with you're not really getting an off season. So at no point are people really taking a month off where they just do easy aerobic work and spend more time with family and get away from the gym. People aren't doing that. They're in the gym year round. There's no off season. They're hammering it day in and day out. And that's where people get burnout. So there's nothing wrong with, for a period of time or a season, getting in more high CNS load work. Like that's probably necessary for improvement, especially for certain people who've been in this game a little bit longer. But at a certain point, you have to be able to pull that out and recover from that to set yourself up to be able to adapt again. So what can you do to avoid this? What did I do to overcome it? I would just recommend increasing doses of your accessory work to start off. So anything like assists the main lifts, things that are a little bit more isolated, things that are going to make sure that you're relying on muscle groups that aren't used all the time in traditional CrossFit metcons. Some of the neglected muscle groups. And I'll actually link to an article that was all about neglected areas within CrossFit. You can go to the show notes there at zorfitness.com/podcast/015. And again, that's always a 3-digit number for this episode. So besides accessory work, increasing doses of lower level aerobic work. And if we can actually combine that with accessory work, that's kind of an ideal scenario there. And I just call that basic aerobic function. And that's what I program a lot for my athletes during their rebound or recovery sessions. And that's something I'll talk more about in episode 19, which is going to be all about those recovery sessions and how to model those. So if we're making sure that we're getting in more accessory work, that we're getting in more lower level aerobic work, that we're getting in some of these things that aren't sport specific so that we can avoid some of those overuse injuries and just avoid being burnt out all the time, that's what's going to allow for long-term adaptation. Number 3, unbalanced doses of weaknesses and strengths. So I think most people probably hear that and they're like, why is he choosing to say in a really fancy way, like work your weaknesses more? And that can be what I'm saying. Like for some people, maybe that's the case where you just don't work your weaknesses at all. But I think most people within the community understand that, like, okay, if I'm really bad at something, I probably should work on that so that I'm more well-rounded as a whole, because that's the idea, is that we're including everything within our movement practice. And where I see people go wrong is that they take that and then they work their weaknesses so much that they actually neglect some of their strengths. And the things that they were good at before, they're not good at anymore. And they're still not that great at their weaknesses. So now you're just kind of not in a great place for either one of those. So we have to understand that it's not ideal for growth or for enjoyment to only focus on your weaknesses. Like whether you only care about growth or you only care about enjoying your actual training, which we should probably have a balance of both those things, because if you're not actually growing, then you're probably not enjoying your movement practice either. We need to have both those. So in order to have both, we need to focus on both actually working your weaknesses at least sometimes or certain parts of the year to a certain degree, but also working our strengths. So your weaknesses, you must improve for you to actually reach your performance potential in the sport of fitness. And the downfall is that you adapt very slowly to the things that you suck at. Like if it's a weakness, you're taking a really long time to actually get better at that thing. That's why it's a weakness. So if something is a strength, you have to keep at least enough doses with that because you're going to respond quickly to that in training, and you're going to keep your confidence and your performance pretty high. But the downfall is if you only focus on your strengths, and guess what? You still suck at the things that you suck at. So what this means is that we have to focus on both those strengths and weaknesses. So for me, this happened because I got hyper focused on improving my weaknesses. And I think just like one example of this could be like my shoulder mobility and bench pressing. So I was pretty good at bench pressing coming into CrossFit because I cared about how I looked in high school, and I did a lot of bodybuilding, powerlifting style workouts. So my shoulder mobility was trash and my bench press was pretty good. So I figured, well, I just bench press a lot less and do a lot more shoulder mobility work. So I basically stopped bench pressing entirely and just did mobility work all the time for my shoulders. And yes, my position for my snatch got better. Yes, my overhead squats got better. Yes, like all the maxes for those went up, which was a great win. But at the same time, my bench press got way worse. And I think this happens with a lot of people where they get obsessed with a single metric, whether it's body weight, their weightlifting numbers, their shoulder mobility, whatever the case may be, and they end up neglecting the things that they were good at. So how do we avoid this? So I would say for weaknesses, pick one thing that is skill-based to learn at a time and one thing that is capacity-based. So something that is skill-based, meaning that like you're going to have to practice those things in non-fatigued settings. So in other words, if you can't do handstand walks more than 5 feet, okay, you have to be doing unfatigued practice to get better at those unbroken handstand walks. So that'll be your skill-based weakness. Something that is capacity-based is when you need to improve a certain quality, but during fatigue. So maybe it's handstand push-up density while you're at a high heart rate, where it's more specific, and again, it's under fatigue. So pick one thing that's skill-based, one thing that's capacity-based, and just run those as long as you need to until they get into an appropriate range for what you think it should be for your weaknesses, and then kind of back it down to a maintenance level. And that's exactly what I recommend for people and their strengths. Don't pull out your strengths entirely. Like at least put in some minimal exposure so you can keep the qualities in yourself, like your own physical qualities that you need. So for example, it would have been a much better scenario for me if I continued to work on my shoulder mobility, but I put in maybe 6 working sets of bench press per week while working on that shoulder mobility routinely. And that wouldn't necessarily blunt my ability to adapt to getting better shoulder mobility. I really don't think so. That 6 working sets is very minimal per week. And I'm not going to get sore from bench press because I've done it for years and I'm pretty routine with it. And as long as I continue to do it consistently, my performance isn't going to drop off near as much as I did. And then if I ever need to improve that metric again, it's going to jump up way quicker because I've held those minimal effective doses to maintain that quality. So say that your strength is aerobic capacity and that you just need to get stronger. Okay, just back that down in intensity and volume during the week, but don't pull it out entirely. Like still do some sessions of aerobic work while you're really focused and putting a lot of your training adaptation currency towards strength work. And then when you want to get better at aerobic work again, it'll be there and or you'll respond to it a whole lot quicker than if you pulled it out entirely. Number 4, prioritizing novelty over consistency. So what this comes down to is having fun and learning how to pace these novel workouts. That is actually part of the sport, and this 100% something that you have to get better at is learning how to respond and appropriately pace to your capacity, something that was thrown at you within 24 hours or even potentially right at that moment. Like you walk into class and see a workout on the board and you know how to pace it by feel or just by seeing how it's written and kind of knowing the time domain, all that stuff. It's really important, but we can really allow that to run rampant because it doesn't necessarily apply to a lot of lower level athletes, especially if you're just trying to learn the skills in the first place. And why did this happen? For one, mixed mode work is super fun. Like I enjoy doing CrossFit. Like that's why I got into it, is because like the Metcons, mashing everything together and seeing what it's like. Figuring out all that stuff is what's fun to me. So like I still seek out novel training experiences all the time, where I'll play with certain breath patterns within a Metcon. I'll put in new pairings of movements that I haven't done before. I'll write a Metcon a different way that I haven't done before. And all these things are super fun for me. But at the same time, it isn't optimal for long-term growth, especially for athletes with younger training ages. So how can you avoid this? I would say number 1 is creating a strategic plan for your training year. So laying out your training year and each training block. And within that plan, you need to build out certain time for structured novelty practice or play or freedom for experimentation or whatever you want to call it. Whatever you're finding particularly entertaining and engaging about your fitness practice is what you should be focusing on during those times. And what this allows for is for you to have fun and actually relax during certain sessions and pieces without having any guilt or feeling off course or anything like that, where you just get to relax and enjoy training for a period of time where it is a little bit less structured, And this also prevents you from just cherry picking workouts all the time where you're not actually making the structured progress that you need and that you're making sure that you actually get the focused work in to prevent you from just kind of being idle in your training. So it's making sure that you're actually staying on course, staying anchored to the program, and making sure that you're following good progressions. Number 5, not having enough fun. So I would say this is the difference between obligation and enjoyment in your training. So sticking on this idea of, are you actually enjoying your training? Or are you just doing it out of an obligation? And at the end of your life, do you want to look back over the course of your fitness career and everything else that was going on and be like, yeah, that was fulfilling and enjoyable? Or you know what? Yeah, I just did that because I felt like I had to do it. Like I was obligated to do it. I just felt like I had to. Obviously, everyone wants to be like, yeah, I felt fulfilled and excited in my day-to-day training, and I really enjoyed it and found fulfillment in it, and that's why I did it. So this idea of feeling excited about training and like wanting to train and like having the desire to train, it's a really important thing. It's one of the things that I have in our readiness to train evaluation. So it's a 1-minute quiz that you take the same time every day, and it gives you a percentage as to how ready you are to train on that particular day. One of the items on there is desire to train. And I'm going to read the 4 categories here. It's number 1, which is going to be the worst, by the way, is I don't want to train today. Number 2 is I will train out of obligation or fear. Number 3 is I will make today a productive session, which is a slight improvement, but still not where we want to be. Or number 4 is I will enjoy training today. And regardless of where you're at, whether you're someone who's more recreational or someone who's very competitive and is like all in, regardless if you like, say you're a games athlete, even a games athlete, you want to be able to look back on the course of your career and be like, you know what, I enjoyed that. And if you're not, like, pick a different profession. Like, you don't have to be a like quote professional athlete. Like, there's plenty of other things out there for you. So just choose to enjoy your training. And for one, this is a personality thing where I've never shied away from hard work. And I think people only think of that as a good thing, but it's kind of a double-edged sword where it's not always a good thing. Like, I often go out of my way to do things because they are hard, like that sort of thing. And often that's a fine thing, and I get where I want to go, but it's easy for me to get buried in my work, where at a certain point, what I've chosen to work on transfers from being hard and fun to being hard and not fun, where it goes from being rewarding and kind of fulfilling to I'm just overcommitted to an ideal and it becomes overbearing and just really not fun to do anymore. And that's a fine line for me, and I think it's also true for a lot of other people. So how can you avoid this? Just kind of know where you stand personality-wise. Again, if you're someone who does kind of bury yourself and tends to be on all the time in the sense that you're going, you have a lot more chance of getting burnt out. And if you're burnt out, you're not having fun. Where you need to build time as you're training for hard things that are rewarding once they're done. So for example, like a marathon or Fran or anything like that, where it's a hard thing and it wasn't fun while you were doing it. Like no one says like, oh yeah, Fran was super enjoyable. Or like, oh yeah, the last 2 miles of that marathon were super enjoyable when I had all those blisters and things. Like no one says that. Like those things really aren't fun, but you get fulfillment and a sense of satisfaction once you were done with those things because you got through them. Versus taking time to build things in your training that are fun while you are doing them during the actual course of that thing. So for example, rock climbing or jumping on the trampoline with your kids or playing spike ball with your buddies, whatever the case is, things that you actually enjoy during them. So in the moment, you can be like, you know what, this is so much fun that I'm having in this moment. That's what I mean. So yes, both the things that are going to give you satisfaction once you are done with them that are hard while you're doing them, but kind of coupling that with things that are fun while you're actually doing them. And last but not least, number 6, doing it all on my own. So for me, this meant that I really had minimal coaching. I certainly had people that I considered coaches, but at no point did I hire a coach. That's what I mean by that. And I'm super thankful for the people that did invest in me. I'm definitely not saying that people didn't invest in me, but I didn't ask others for help enough. And too often I was trying to self-teach technique and like looking up YouTube videos and that sort of thing rather than asking someone in person. Like, don't get me wrong, there's definitely a place for self-teaching. Like, thank goodness for YouTube. Like I wouldn't have had a weight lift otherwise. But at the same time, we have to be able to get more in-person contact. We have to have eyes on us and get real-time feedback. And because ultimately all those things are going to accelerate your growth as an athlete so much faster than if you did it on your own. Like I can't tell you how much quicker I learned how to weight lift having the eyes of a coach on me versus trying to teach myself from YouTube. Having an experienced coach give you feedback on your training is probably the most important thing you can do to accelerate your growth as an athlete. So why didn't I hire a coach? So my excuse was I was broke. Like I couldn't afford it. That would be what I would have said in that moment if you had asked me. But what I really think it came down to was just being like selfish in the sense that like I wanted to say that I did this. Like, look all the work that I put in. This is what I've built. Like that sort of mentality. And maybe I wasn't actively thinking that, but that certainly was kind of playing in the background for me. And while I'm actually a pretty coachable person, that mindset definitely didn't help my growth in that particular time. So what can we do to overcome this? Honestly, I would just say invest in coaching, because any type of coaching, whether it's formal or not, it's just accelerating your growth as a whole. Like having someone else light your path for you where you can see what's going on and they have perspective and can, hold your hand through that process, that is invaluable to you as an athlete. But the issue comes up again where people are like, yeah, but I'm broke. And one of the things that stood out for me, I ended up actually investing in some coaching education and that I thought was out of my price range. And this was the thing that spurred me to do that. It was a quote from Ramit Sethi, and it was, what if you could 10x your spending in your favorite category if you cut spending ruthlessly in the other areas? So in other words, if you want to get a coach and that's, 10 times as much as you would normally spend on like a fitness category, what if you could cut other areas of your spending so that you could actually afford that? So in other words, what if you took all the money that you've been spending on supplements and alcohol? Oh, and you know what? Now you can actually afford a coach. Or if you took the money that you spent on your Starbucks every morning and you brewed your own coffee instead, oh, guess what? Now you can afford a coach. So another question to ask yourself would be like, how much money would I pay to PR my snatch? Or how much money would I pay to do a muscle up for the first time? Or to get my 2K row in a competitive range? And for me, that was the catalyst that I needed to be able to go and invest in that certain area of myself. And that's exactly how you have to think about it. It's an investment in your future self. So if you've been wanting to hire a coach, you don't know exactly how that works or if you can afford it, and you don't want to get in an awkward conversation and like all that kind of stuff, and you have all those fears and excuses, and I've heard them all, and don't be so arrogant or I guess potentially naive in the fact that like you aren't the only one having this experience. Like this experience is not unique to you. Like the same stuff goes through everyone's mind as they're thinking about initiating a conversation with someone who they're potentially considering to hire as a coach. So if you're a person who's been wanting a coach, regardless if you think you can afford it or not, email me. DM me, leave me a comment, make a smoke signal. I don't care. Just don't sit on it and wait. Likely we'll be able to figure something out and we'll be able to work it together, whether that's like a full-time thing, a part-time, just for certain elements of your training. Like I have people that I just do accessory work for, or just skill work, or just do some like film critique for them. Or maybe it's just you sending some videos and I'm offering some free advice. Whatever the case is, I'd love for you to reach out and we can chat about your future. So email me at ben@zorfitness.com. Or you can jump on Instagram and send me a message that way at ZorFitness or at ben.wise. Either one of those will be perfectly fine. I'll be sure to get back to you. I always make sure to respond to people. And again, it's perfectly fine if you just have a personal question about your training or you want to send me some videos and get my advice on stuff. Like whatever the case is, you don't necessarily even have to hire me. Like I truly just want to interact with people and I really enjoy critiquing people's videos and looking at them, helping people out. Like that's why I'm here. That's why I'm in the coaching business, because I want to help people. So reach out, ben@zorfitness.com or at ZorFitness or at ben.wise. Any of those accounts will be just fine. Hey, it's Ben again, and I wanted to take a minute to talk about our online training program, The Protocol. The Protocol is for athletes who want to train for the sport of fitness. It's programmed by me, and it's my best attempt at preparing athletes with varying strengths and weaknesses for the demands of the sport. And I do this through the use of silos, which basically means I segment parts of the program based upon athletes' ability in a particular area. So for example, an element of the program this fall on Tuesdays and Thursdays was gymnastics-focused training. And there were 4 different silos, so athletes could choose to work on chest bars or muscle-ups or handstand push-ups or handstand walks. In other words, we are all doing the same core program, but there are ways to individualize it on a weekly basis. And as part of the program, I also include coaches' notes, technique videos, and educational resources almost daily. My goal is to not just have this feel like you're doing a workout plan, but to feel like I'm actually coaching you through the process of becoming the best athlete you can be. And having access to the protocol is just part of the benefit of being a pro member. You also get instant access to the Vault, which is exactly like it sounds. It means that you unlock the ability to be able to download all the programs that I've ever written. So this includes things like Bulletproof Body, which is the accessory work for functional fitness, gymnastics density for the Big 5, functional thickness, your first muscle up, cyclical supremacy, overhead squat mobility, breath work for the sport of fitness, and it could go on and on. And lastly, you get instant access to pro articles, which are on topics that I really want to safeguard from the public and keep for my athletes. Stuff like cycle speeds for CrossFit open movements, strength ratio data analysis, so basically determining your relative weaknesses on strength work, breaking down sanctionals programming or games programming, energy systems testing and analysis, and a whole lot more. And if this sounds like stuff that you're into, you can get a 7-day free trial of Pro. Simply head over to zorfitness.com/pro. Thanks for listening, and as always, stay the course.